When questions were being asked yesterday evening, it struck me that the real interest which keeps on coming up again and again is what happens after enlightenment. There's that interest which keeps on bugging you. But the main thing is, the question is based on what happened to you after self-realization or enlightenment. So there's really nothing that can happen to a you, and yet it happens to a you. It cannot happen to you, to a you, the ego, because the basis of the enlightenment or self-realization is the annihilation of the ego. And yet there is a you which has to be there for the body-mind organism to function. Ramana Maharshi lived for 60 years after his self-realization. So who lived for 60 years? That's a valid question and has to be answered. Who lived after 60 years? In the same way, if somebody, during those 60 years, if somebody called Ramana Maharshi by name, whatever it is, Swami or Bhagwan or Ramana or whatever, he must have responded, turned to him and said, "What can I do for you?" So the response to the name being called obviously means identification with a name and form. So the identification with an individual name and form, separate from the others, continues. For an individual jnani to live, the separate identification with a separate body-mind organism and a name must continue. But there's a very big difference between the identification with a name and form which continues after the ego is destroyed, after the sense of personal doership is destroyed. So what is destroyed after self-realization or enlightenment? Now, Heiner, I'm sorry I didn't give you time. Did you have to make an announcement?
No.
Oh, I see. Okay, then I shall continue. So this identification with a name and form, which continues, is totally different from that which has been annihilated. That is clear. So what has been annihilated? What has been annihilated is the sense of personal doership. That does not mean annihilation of the identification with a name and form. That is not usually understood. So what is expected is that the individual is gone, dead. It's like a vegetable. So a jnani, or where understanding has happened, would be like a vegetable. You go and strike him, and he strikes you back. You say, what kind of a jnani is he? What kind of enlightenment is it? I hit him and he hit me back. So the identification with a name and form which continues has been beautifully described by Ramana Maharshi. Like he says, that identification which continues, I use the word identification with a name and form. Ramana Maharshi, with his limited knowledge of the English language, used the word in Tamil. He says the ego. Now that also people have to understand when they read. They have to go behind the words. So the words of Ramana Maharshi are, even in the case of a jnani, the ego sometimes arises. Those are his words. So people must have said, what does it mean then? So he's asked me to explain. The ego that arises, which Ramana Maharshi says, he is described as the remnants, like the remnants of a burnt rope. The remnants of a burnt rope. The rope is burnt. The form of the rope remains. But you can't tie up anybody with that rope. That's how he describes it beautifully. So the identification with a name and form continues. So before I continue with this, let me read a passage from the book Who Cares? My daughter, who got a copy of this, called up. She had a very good understanding. So she called up and said, Daddy, I don't understand this. Have you got a book? Have you got a copy? I said, yes. He said, last paragraph on page 20. I'll read it out. She said, I don't understand it. Let me read it out. When faith in the will of God is lost, even that would be God's will, kindness and compassion come in. When kindness and compassion are lost, there arise moral do's and don'ts. When morality is lost, religious dogmas come in. Religion being the husk and not the kernel of faith in God, religious wars begin. Let me read it out again. When faith in the will of God is lost, even that would be God's will, kindness and compassion come in. When kindness and compassion are lost, there arise moral do's and don'ts. When morality is lost, religious dogmas come in. Religion being the husk and not the kernel of faith in God, religious wars begin. So she said she didn't understand it. Surely, kindness and compassion is part of faith in the will of God. That's the portion she couldn't understand. So, my explanation was this. The faith in the will of God is not an individual's faith in the will of God. Faith in the will of God truly means the surrender of the personal will, the personal individual. Total faith in the will of God means surrender of the individual sense of doership to God. When that is lost, the individual comes in and says, I must be kind and compassionate. The individual who is lost in the total faith in the will of God, when that is lost, when the total faith in the will of God is not there, the individual comes in with the necessity to be kind and compassionate. And when kindness and compassion are lost, moral values come in, moral do's and don'ts come in. If kindness and compassion is there, the question of moral do's and don'ts don't arise. So when moral do's and don'ts arise, there is a list of things to be done, things not to be done. With the promise, implied promise if not expressed, that once you do that, God will be on your side. So, they expect God to take sides. When you follow certain moral do's and don'ts, you will win over God to your side. And when morality is lost and religion takes over, religious dogmas come into the picture. And dogmas of one religion are not acceptable to another, and that's how religious wars begin. So this progression or regression is usually what is said in the seeker. They begin with the seeker and end with the destruction of the seeker. This paragraph, somehow which came out spontaneously, starts with self-realization and ends with the beginning of the seeker. So ends with self-realization. So self-realization to me means total faith in the will of God. So what is, yesterday the questions were asked, and I did feel that the mind intellect which conceives the questions needs and deserves a reasonably valid answer. The question is implied, what happened to you when self-realization happened or enlightenment happened? That is how it is construed. That the person concerned, the identification with a name and form, is the person after enlightenment has happened. So that personalized identification with a name and form, the person, is entitled to say, what happened, I cannot describe. That is correct. But the real question is, what has happened to you after self-realization? That is the one that people are interested in. What has happened to you after enlightenment? If the basis of enlightenment is you being destroyed, who is it that is now talking? Who is it that is now living his or her life? And that question arises because of the misunderstanding between the ego that is annihilated, which is the sense of personal doership, and what continues thereafter, a simple identification with a name and form. Some Zen master, I forget the name, or maybe the Tao master, I don't know. He described self-realization or the effect of self-realization very simply. So he must be a Tao master, not Zen master. He said, everything becomes crystal clear. No doubts remain. That's where he stopped. Everything becomes crystal clear. No doubts remain. To that I would add, no wants remain. No wants remain. So, how does life continue? no wants remain because there is no individual entity wanting anything. The wanting is personal doership. So no wants remain. But otherwise, with no wants remaining, what does that identification with a name and form do in life? The answer is the identification with a name and form, the person continues to live his life exactly as he lived before. The only difference being, earlier, the person thought he was living his or her life. After self-realization, the deepest possible confirmation is that life was being lived through me being again the identification with the name and form and not the sense of personal doership. And life will continue to be lived through me. And when I say life will continue to be lived through me, I mean life, as before, will continue to be lived through you and him and her. In other words, life that is being lived through any body-mind organism will be merely witnessed, including the body-mind organism which he calls himself. So what happens then is that life as it happens, events as they happen, deeds as they are done, actions that are done, are merely witnessed not as those of an individual doer, but as part of the total functioning of manifestation or God's will. That is what is happening. Now, when there is no real distinction made between anything which happens through another body-mind organism or through this own body-mind organism, let me tell you an incident that happened with my earlier guru in Pune, not Rajneesh. He had an ashram, a small ashram, where disciples, whenever they could, during their holidays or leave, could get together. One Friday morning, or Saturday, I think it was Saturday, I was there. I happened to be there Saturday morning. And the ashram, close by the ashram, were a number of hutments, where the poorest of the poor lived with their children. And the children being children, and Saturday was a holiday, so there was noisy and they were playing on the streets. Where else could they play? They were noisy and very playful. And suddenly there was a hue and cry about somebody being hurt. So a couple of people were sent from the ashram to find out what had happened. And then they brought in an old man who used to be an irregular visitor to the ashram. And he was hurt. So the story was, he really was with a total understanding. Self-realization had happened. But he was such a simple man, and he was not concerned with the world recognizing him as a self-realized. He really didn't live his life. He went wherever God took him. He used to dress shabbily, never cared for his appearance, so that he was a prime target for the playful children. So how it started was, someone made fun of him and expected him to get angry. But he didn't get angry. He joined in the fun. He laughed himself, which irritated the boy who made fun of him. So he threw a stone at him. And when someone in the children throws a stone, others started throwing stones. And he was injured. So when the two people from the ashram went out, they brought him in. And a lot of grumbling. They said, this goes on all the time. The police don't do anything. Somebody should do something about it. And that kind of a thing. And the old man was brought in. The injuries were not particularly bad. Just a wound here, just a wound there. So the two people in there, they cleaned up the wounds with Dettol or Listerine or whatever, cleaned up the wounds, applied something, and he was all right. But while this grumbling was going on, then the old man says, what is all the grumbling about? I don't understand. He really said, I don't understand. What has really happened? He says, some hands threw stones at me and injured me. Some other hands have cleaned up the wounds. What's all the fuss about? Some hands threw stones at me and made some wounds. And some other hands have cleaned up the wounds. What is all the fuss about? And it was not a statement made to impress anybody. It came straight from the heart. So that is what I mean when I say that witnessing happens about anything that happens to any body-mind organism. Then, because of the sense of doership not being there, there is no distinction of my actions, his actions, her actions, or your actions. That is what happens. So, what else happens? No wants. Whatever happens is accepted. What else happens? Please remember, what I am saying now is from my own experience. I am not telling in somebody else's experience. So my own experience is that what else happens, there is no fear of life. I mean, when this means there is no fear of life. Whatever happens is my destiny, which no power on earth can stop it. How this body is going to die, in what form, in what circumstances, is all planned, is all there. So just as there is no fear of life, there is no fear of death. Talking of death, let me tell you what happened once. Early morning, I used to play golf with 3 other people. There is a golf course close to my house. Not a full-fledged competitive golf, but good enough to go around in hour and a half, 2 hours in the morning. So we used to go quite early. And once, at a particular tee, for the golfers who are not golfers, a tee is a raised ground from which the first shot is hit for that particular hole. We had just finished teeing off. On the 5th tee, I remember that. Then just as we were about to go out of the tee, a huge kite. Kite is an eagle family. Much smaller, of course, but usual, enormous span of wings that came right at us, as if it is going to attack us. But we were already off the tee. And then this bird did a fantastic thing. It came, landed on the tee, spread its wings, raised its neck, looked at the sun, the morning sun, looked at the morning sun and laid its head down and died. See? One of our golfers flippantly said, "Cashing in your chips, are you, fella?" Somehow, it jarred on my nerves. Cashing in your chips, are you, fellas? That was one way of looking at it. A bird dying. The way I looked at it, to me, it was simply one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen. A bird comes, knowing that it is dying. There is no panic, there is no flutter of wings or going about. Comes quietly, has decided on the place to die, lands there, looks at the sun, puts its head down, and lays down its life. To me, it was one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen. No fear of death at all. So, what happens after enlightenment? There is no fear of life, there is no fear of living, and there is no fear of dying. That is one of the things that has happened, is happening in my case. I repeat, what happens in other cases, I don't know. Now, talking about dying, there's another incident I would like to tell you. That is about my brother-in-law, my wife's sister's husband. He lived in Pune. He was a doctor, extremely soft-hearted. He was also a fellow disciple of my earlier guru. The core of his being was bhakti, devotion. He loved to sing bhajans and extraordinarily soft-hearted. So when he became a doctor, he decided to specialize in examination of blood and pathology. I'm sorry? No, he was pathology. He became a pathologist. And he could have made plenty of money as a specialized pathologist. But there again, his softness came into the picture. And he said, "No, I don't want to make money because of people's illnesses." So he took a job with the government as a government pathologist, where there was a fixed salary, reasonably good, but nowhere near what he could have made as an independent practitioner. So he was an extremely well-liked man, always ready to oblige. If anybody wanted someone to play on the tabla while bhajans were, he was always available. An extremely well-liked man in the area. So one Thursday or Friday, or maybe Wednesday, he had a pain in the neck, spreading to the shoulder. He took the usual painkillers. Nothing happened. And it got worse. Until the pain descended to his chest. Then, of course, he called a friend of his who lived close by. He brought his electrocardiogram machine, and when he put it on, he could see that the heart attack was so violent, and yet it was one of those painless ones. There was no pain. I mean, the pain was similar, which had come down from the pain in the neck. But he could see on his cardiogram machine that the line was almost flat. That means he was dying. So as soon as he came in and put the machine on, he told his wife, he'll have to go to hospital, prepare some clothes for him to be taken. So he himself was a doctor. So he saw on the machine what was happening. So he knew he was dying. And so his wife asked, what shall I put in the bag? She said, we'll see later on. He knew he was dying. So from then on, the remarkable thing is there was no panic at all. And the incredible thing was that he kept telling the doctor what was happening in his body. So he says, now there is numbness in the toes. Now the numbness is creeping up. The numbness is in my lower legs. Now the numbness is creeping up. It's in my legs. Until he came almost straight to the numbness is in the heart. Then he stopped talking and died with a smile on his face. Now, was he self-realized? Who cares? Was he enlightened? Who cares? He didn't. He just lived his life knowing that it was not he who is living his life. And all he could do as an individual was to be kind and compassionate. So that was my two experiences of death as I know it. Another experience of death that I know, not actual death, but the phenomenon of death. My granddaughter was probably 3 years old. There was no death in the family or friends until then. So there was someone died, and there was talk of someone dying. So she asked my son, her father, he said, what is death? So, as a child of 3, some kind of an explanation could have been given which satisfied the child of 3. But no, that was not the way my son was programmed. He said, the child must know. And he started explaining in great detail what death was about. My wife and I looked at each other. That's not the way we would have done, but the child was his, not ours. So he explained it beautifully. And the child was she always has been an extremely intelligent child. Now, she heard the whole thing, and finally she came out with a remark. She said, yes, Daddy, I understand what you say, but I'm not going to die. But I'm not going to die. Deep down, intuitively, she knew she wasn't born and she wasn't going to die. She didn't make the distinction about the object being born and the object being dead. All she knew was she wasn't born, she was not going to die. She said, Daddy, I'm not going to die. And we just looked at each other. So, any questions?
You said There are no doubts remain and no wants remain.
No doubts remain?
And no wants remain.
That's right.
If you have no want, how can you...
You see, no doubts remain. The doubts are in the mind intellect, the ego. Who has doubts? The egotistic mind element, intellect. Who has doubts? Mind intellect, the ego has doubts. But when the ego is dead, the sense of a me as a doer is gone, no more doubts remain.
The doubts is easier for me to understand.
Yes.
The wants is more difficult.
The wants. Who has wants? The individual has wants. The individual has a sense of it, a doership. He is the one who wants something. If there is mere identification with a name and form, wants are not there. All the basic understanding is that whatever is needed either will be supplied or will not be supplied. Whether the needs are satisfied or not will depend on God's will and the destiny of this body-mind organism.
So the want is not if I want to buy a computer or something. This is not a want. You described something else.
Oh yes, but that is the want will be there. But the understanding is whether that want is to be will be satisfied or not is not in your control. The want is not a personal want. The want becomes the need. You see, I would make a slight distinction between the need and the want. The need is for the body-mind organism, for the functioning of the body-mind organism.
But I don't need a computer.
You don't need a computer, so you don't need a computer, but you need something else. You need a bicycle.
I don't need a bicycle.
So you have not only no wants, you have not even any needs. Many will envy you.
So how's the distinction between wants and needs?
The needs are for the body-mind organism to live. Food is a need.
Food is essential, but a bicycle is not essential.
So, therefore, the bicycle may be essential for a job you have. Either you walk or you bicycle to your place of work. Either you bicycle in 15 minutes or you walk for 2 hours or 1.5 hours. So a bicycle becomes a need. So the bicycle becoming a need, whether that need will be fulfilled or not, is also accepted as not. So, but that doesn't prevent you from doing whatever you think you should do. That's why we go back to the free will. Does the individual have free will? Of course. The individual has free will to decide to do something. So what is your decision? You will go and ask a friend to lend you some money to buy the bicycle. Do it. Whether that decision will be fructified, the decision will turn into something that you want, whether your friend will be able to lend you the money, is not in your control. But that does not prevent you from making a decision to go to your friend and ask for a loan. And if it is God's will and the destiny of this body-mind organism, the friend will grant you the loan, you will buy a bicycle and repay the loan.
So luxury is not a need.
You see, now we are going into luxury. A luxury, if a person is born in luxury, if luxury is his part of life, way of life, because understanding has happened, he is not going to give up all his wealth. He is not going to give. He wouldn't expect himself to give up. Now, in the Bhagavad Gita, you see, many people, if you ask them, who have studied the Bhagavad Gita, what is the core of the Bhagavad Gita? Promptly the answer is renunciation. Many students of Bhagavad Gita, teachers of Bhagavad Gita, you ask them, what is the core of the Bhagavad Gita? Renunciation. So, in this case, even in the Bhagavad Gita, when they point that way, I usually point out, what does Lord Krishna tell Arjuna? Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, you may decide not to fight, but that decision will be futile. The programming in this body-mind organism, a born warrior, trained to be a warrior, will not allow you not to fight. You may decide not to fight it, but it will be a futile decision. Therefore, Lord Krishna tells him, fight, win the war, and enjoy the fruits of victory. Lord Krishna doesn't tell Arjuna, fight, win the war, and then give up the fruits. No, he says, enjoy the fruits of victory. There was a jnani, well known in Hindu mythology or scriptures, King Janaka. He was a king. He lived a king's life. Being a king, he didn't live the life of a beggar. He lived the life of a king. But he was a jnani. There was total understanding. So once what happened, I'll tell you a story about King Janaka. There was a guru with his ashram and disciples. And the guru found one disciple really interested in this, good understanding. But he had some doubt about this renunciation. He expected.
What is renunciation?
Renunciation means giving up. Renunciation means giving up. Deliberately giving up. So, the Guru decided to send this disciple to King Janaka with a request that King Janaka have a talk with this disciple. So, when this disciple came to the court of King Janaka in the evening, the usual king's way of life was happening. Music, dancing girls, going on, courtiers, drinking probably, I don't know. But a king's way of life was being enacted. So this disciple, looks up and says, what kind of a man has my Guru sent me to? Enjoying himself like this? Anyway, he meets King Janaka, and King Janaka tells him, you have come all day, traveling all day, you must be tired. The servant will take you to your quarters, rest there, and tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, I will call on you, and I'll take you out for a walk in the garden, and we can talk. So the next morning, King Janaka went to this quarters, got the man out, and they started walking. As they started walking, very few steps after they had gone, the disciple saw that fire had taken place in his quarters. So he told King Janaka, he said, Your Majesty, there's a fire there. So the King Janaka said, yes, let's carry on with our talk. Further few steps, the fire got out. He said, Your Majesty, the fire is getting... Yes, let us stop. And then he couldn't, the disciple couldn't wait any longer. So he said, Your Majesty, you may have many clothes, but my only other loincloth is on the string drying. So this great renunciator was worried about his only other loincloth. Whereas King Janaka would not have been worried if the whole palace had gone into burnt away. So this renunciation, giving up, is one of the do's and don'ts. One of the religious do's and don'ts. So no wants remain. That is to say, if there are needs, they have to be fulfilled or not fulfilled. Whether they will be fulfilled or not fulfilled, not in my control. It's God's will. So if the needs are to be fulfilled, they will be fulfilled.
So I understand if the want does not remain after it is not satisfied.
I'm sorry.
It is a need.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
If the want does not continue to exist after it is not satisfied.
No. What I'm saying is, once the enlightenment has happened, and truly there is no individual doer as an entity, no wants remain. Now wants would be this way. What are the normal individual beings' wants? He has a home, he has a family, he has a car, he has a one-car garage. Normally he would be happy. But the individual wants rise. He says, the mind intellect, the thinking mind, the wanting mind says, I want a bigger house. I want a 3-car garage. Now that is a wanting. Whether it is a need or not is another matter. But that is a wanting, and that is what often happens in life. Wanting more of what you have, wanting something that you don't have, those are the wants. And those wants disappear, meaning there is acceptance of what is. But if there is a need, then the body-mind organism, the identification with a name and form, will continue to decide to do whatever it is, whatever it can do to satisfy that need. But having decided and done what it can do, that body-mind organism then accepts whatever happens as the will of God and the destiny of that body-mind organism. In other words, if that need is not satisfied, there is no egoic frustration. That is the point. If the need is satisfied, fine. If the need is not satisfied, it is accepted as God's will and the destiny of that body-mind organism for that need not to be satisfied.
Okay, thank you.
You said after self-realization, there is life is merely witnessed.
Yes.
And we often hear that in witnessing,
Yes.
there is nobody there to witness.
That is correct.
But life must also be able to be observed, because the ego is there.
No. If you say, we are talking about a case where self-realization has happened, hasn't it?
Yes.
That means the ego, the sense of doership, is no longer there. It has been annihilated. So what functions through that body-mind organism is not the ego with a sense of personal doership, but merely identification with a name and form, which in the words of Ramana Maharshi is like the burnt remnants of a burnt rope.
But you still observe life and make decisions.
No, the decisions that are made are not by any observing. The decisions that are made by the working mind.
Yes.
So the working mind continues after self-realization. So it is the thinking mind which is the ego, that is destroyed. But that identification with a name and form continues to function with the aid of the working mind.
And with a working mind you can observe life, can't you?
The working mind will only, observing by the working mind is witnessing.
I see.
It is the thinking mind which judges. The thinking mind as the observer observes and judges. The working mind merely observes.
Yeah, okay.
And does whatever is necessary. The working mind sees something is burning, the working mind will do everything possible to put out the fire. Whoever it is, whether his or his neighbors. The thinking mind will say, well, he is a bad neighbor, let it burn. That doesn't happen. The working mind says there is a fire, it has to be put out. You see? So the identification with a name and form with the working mind continues.
Yeah, thank you.
And observing by the working mind is impersonal witnessing.
Thank you.
Most welcome. Yes. Just behind you.
I have no question, but
A comment?
there is a problem. It seems to be a problem here, because you all what you give.
I think if you hold the thing straight,
So
ah,
all what you give the people here are
Yes.
concepts.
I'm sorry.
All what you give, all what you give to the people here are
Yes.
concepts,
Yes.
and that includes that you are a swindler.
Oh, how have I swindled you? I promise you the very first time that I may not be able to give you what you have come here to get. Very first sentence, I think.
Yes, the problem is.
What is the problem?
It seems to be a problem. Yes, it's a mountain.
Is your problem that you think you have not got what you wanted? Is that the problem?
But it's possible we can make a translation.
Oh, sure. You want to, yes, of course. Talk in German. Mark will translate.
Yes, you.
Yes, go ahead.
The last answer, please
Ja.
translate.
Er fragt dich, ob das Problem ist, dass du nicht das bekommen hast, was du erwartet hast.
No. The problem is I have read all your books and a lot of doing, a lot of reading, a lot of hearing, and then there is a ball. Nothing is to do now.
There is nothing to be done now.
Nothing is to be done now. Yes, and it makes me a little bit crazy.
This saying, he came to the conclusion after having read all of your books, having listened to you, seen your tapes, So he says he came to the conclusion there is nothing to be done. And this makes him a little bit crazy, as he's saying.
Then it is God's will and the destiny of this body-mind organism to feel crazy at this moment.
Yes, absolutely right.
But who knows? Tomorrow morning the craziness may go and say, of course that's right. Anything can happen.
But the problem is the activity of mind and thinking is.
Look, please talk in German, then he can translate. Because
yes,
your thoughts will come
I say
easier
it.
then.
It's better to, because my English is not so perfect. Das Problem ist, dass ich die Situation hier ist letztendlich ein Theaterstück oder ein Schwindel. Und ich komme also auf der intellektuellen Ebene nicht mehr weiter. Und jetzt ist natürlich die Frage, ja, was soll ich machen? Soll ich jetzt fahren oder?
Yeah, just let me translate. Lass mich übersetzen, bitte. He's saying that his problem is that now, while being here, he has the impression that all this is a big circus. So it's he says he don't know what to do. On the intellectual level, he can see there is nothing more he can understand. So he's doubting whether he should leave, whether he should go, or whether he should continue to stay here.
Make a decision. You make a decision. Whether that decision turns out or not to be a fact, we'll wait and see. You can decide either to stay or to go. Whether you actually go or stay, only time will tell. Because that will depend on God's will and the destiny of the body-mind organism. Whether you stay or not will depend on God's will. But you can decide. So nothing to be done is really not correct.
But God is a concept, and the Guru is a concept too.
Yes, but you said nothing to be done. What I am saying on the contrary is, do whatever you like. Do whatever you think you should do. And that is, decide to do something. By all means.
But there's the feeling I can do nothing.
No. The feeling should be that you can only make a decision. What turns out of that decision is not in your control. And that has been your experience all your life. You have made decisions, some have turned out right, some have turned out wrong. You have made decisions, which some have been good, some have been bad. You have decided to act. Actions have sometimes happened, more often they have not happened. That is your own personal experience so far. That what you want, what you decide to have, sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. That depends on God's will. That is all I am saying. But that does not prevent you from making any decision at any moment. That is your free will to make a decision.
Free will is a concept.
Free will, that is the free will. Free will to make a decision. Nothing prevents you from making a decision. It is out of your free will that you make a decision. But there the free will ends. There the free will ends.
Yes, the ending of free will is in the understanding of this ending in free will is seems to be a problem and makes me a little bit in trouble. Can you translate it? No.
Into German?
He wants you to translate his German thinking.
No. Yeah, maybe.
Can you translate the statement from Ramesh in German?
Ach so, er sagt, dass es wäre ein Missverständnis, wenn du glauben würdest, du könntest oder dürftest nichts tun. Was du auf jeden Fall tun kannst, ist dich entscheiden, wenn du kannst. Ob dann diese Entscheidung zu dem führt, was du dir wünschst, was du als richtig anschaust, das liegt dann nicht mehr in deinen Händen, sondern das ist in der Hand des Lebens oder in der Hand von Gott. Und ich würde hinzufügen, du kannst tun, was immer du möchtest, wenn du weißt, dass es in Wirklichkeit nicht du bist, der das tut. Die Angst, wie ich das spüre, kommt daher, dass du glaubst, du könntest dich falsch entscheiden. Nein?
Ich sag's nochmal in Deutsch. Das Hauptproblem
Okay.
läuft letztendlich auf diesen Satz von Raméš Maharadže hinaus. Nichts hat jemals stattgefunden. Alles ist konzeptuell und auch das, was hier abläuft, ist alles konzeptuell.
Okay. Ja.
Und der Guru ist ein Schwindler und Jesus war ein Spaßmacher. Letztendlich ist das alles ein Film, der abläuft und ich sehe das aber auch noch aus der Sicht oder irgendwie aus der Sicht des Egos und da ergibt sich ein Problem. Ich kann jetzt nichts mehr tun und es erzeugt einen gewissen Druck.
Ja.
Und das ist das eigentliche Problem. Ich kann es
will
nur
das
so
übersetzen. Okay.
akzeptieren.
Okay.
Das ist der Kern meines Problems eigentlich, dass man am Ende, Gott ist ja auch ein Konzept, der Guru ist ein Konzept, das ist die Spitze der Pyramide.
Ja.
Und dann geht es nicht mehr weiter.
Ja, lass mich mal übersetzen, bitte, ja? He's saying, to him now, all comes to the point that all is a concept. He says, to him now, it comes to that saying of Ramana that nothing happens, that everything is a concept. So
Sure.
he says, intellectually he can understand, he
Yes.
can see that both the God, the Guru, and all that is happening here is a concept,
Yes.
he says. But he can understand this, but he has difficulty to accept it.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah?
Yes.
He wants to continue.
No. I just was asking whether this was what you wanted to say.
I see. Now, you have a problem. That's what it comes down to. You have a problem. The problem being how to make the intellectual understanding go deeper. Right? All
Yes,
right.
that's it.
Then the answer, I'm afraid, is it is not in your control. It is not in your control to push the intellectual understanding down to the understanding at heart. But I would say one thing, that the intellectual understanding has happened, that even the intellectual understanding has happened, is the grace of God. That even that intellectual understanding would not have happened unless it was God's will. Even that intellectual understanding could not have happened unless it is God's will. So, leave it to God's will when and where to push the intellectual understanding down to the real understanding. Leave it to that power which was able to create the intellectual. There are many who may even not have the intellectual understanding.
Yes, nothing is to do.
Nothing to do except decide what you want to do. I mean, big difference. Yes, please.
Yes, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
There are psychological methods. If you have information as to what they are, you can act as if you have the choice to use them. They may not work, but the information that we have gives us certain methodologies to work with this particular situation, and it may not work. But on the other hand, if you don't have that information, then you wouldn't even have the choice to appear to try them. So it may be helpful to have this information of these 200 years or 300 years of psychological methodologies, which are only 3 or 4, that for many people do help, for some do not help. So that's one thing that I'm thinking. The other thing is that when Mark spoke the other day, he was saying, I didn't get, precisely, but everything is in flux, including everything in the universe. Nothing is permanent, including the programming, it seems to me. See, in your teaching, sometimes I get the impression that the programming is solid, that the conditioning and the programming, unlike anything else in the universe, is a solid form.
No.
Yeah, that's where I'm mixed up because...
No, that's where you're mixed up.
Yeah.
Let me explain. What you are getting now is conditioning. Fresh conditioning. What you are getting now is fresh conditioning, effect of which can be to alter or amend the existing conditioning.
But see, I'm going to make the assumption about this man, but it's not about this particular man. I'm going to make the assumption with anybody that I hear in the psychology thing, that what they have right now, it's not going to stay that way if they simply witness it. That somehow that the nature that Mark was talking about is such in the Taoist or whichever, that things are not going to stay steady if you can witness them. So I wonder if that's accurate.
If you can witness them.
No, if it can be witnessed.
So, if witnessing happens.
If witnessing happens.
And who is in control of the witnessing happening?
We don't know.
We do. Not you. We do. We do. Not you. That is all you need to know. That it is not in your control. Whose control is it is irrelevant. What is relevant is it is not in your control.
So my last question with reference to this, not, this kind of universal, I'm going crazy, is sometimes this condition will just stay like that, and there won't be shifts and fluxes and movements that Mark was talking about, that the physicists have told us is what the universe consists of, is this movement, that sometimes you see that it can just stay stuck?
I told him tomorrow morning it could change. I told him, you heard me. What the problem is today, tomorrow morning it may not be. All depends on God's will. So God's will created the problem, and God's will can make it disappear overnight.
But God's will also creates eternal movement.
Everything is God's will. Internal movement, external movement, whatever.
Eternal. In other words, everything is going to move.
Everything is God's will. Nothing happens unless it is God's will. If you have the understanding, it is God's will. If you don't have the understanding, it is God's will. If your understanding is only intellectual, that's God's will. But if your understanding is deeper and total, it is God's will. And of course, when I use the word God, I do not mean an all-powerful entity connected with manifestation. I mean the very source from which the manifestation itself has come about.
So you said that I have the free will to decide, but
Yes.
The way I decide is also depending on my program, isn't it?
That is correct.
So, and my program is not my free will. So
That is correct.
So my decision is also not my free will.
That is why I said you do have free will, but that free will is counterfeit. Maybe counterfeit, but you do have free will.
Vielleicht sage ich es jetzt in Deutsch, ja. So jetzt auch für uns als Psychotherapeuten, vielleicht, ich möchte es jetzt einfach so zum Überdenken, ja. Was wir tun, ist, dass wir am Programm arbeiten und ob das Programm jetzt mit dieser Änderung, die wir machen wollen oder der Klient auch haben will, ob das funktioniert, liegt wieder ganz irgendwo anders. Also das ist in Gottes Wille.
She's saying, as a psych therapist, she has the impression that she is working on the program of people, of the clients that come to see her. So whether that change will happen or not, of the programming is not in the hand of the psych therapist.
That is correct.
Also not in the hands
But that
Also not in the hand of the client.
No, that depends on the will of God and the destiny of the therapist and the client. The destiny of the therapist and the client. You see? So, if the destiny of a particular client is to be helped by you, he will be helped. But if the destiny of another client is not to be helped by you, he will not be helped. You do the same thing. You use your knowledge and information. Same way. Effect of it is the destiny of the relative clients. Sometimes the therapy works, sometimes it doesn't. So whether it works or not is the destiny of both the therapist and the client. Why do I say both the therapist and the client? Because if it is the destiny of the therapist to have 10 clients in a row who are not to be satisfied, then the destiny of the therapist will be to acquire a bad name. It's the other way around also. If it is the destiny of a therapist to have 10 successful clients, everybody will talk about how good a therapist she is. So that depends also on your destiny. That's why I say what happens depends on the destiny of both the therapist and the client. That's how therapists or physicians get their name. He's a good physician, he's not such a good. Why? Because one has more successful patients than the other. And that depends on the destiny of the physician or therapist concerned.
I understand that for an individual, based on the understanding that everything is God's will, and how is it in groups like families or in a company where many people have to be together? And sometimes I have the feeling that like my partner goes in a different direction than me, and whose will is being, well, I understand that everybody is God's will, but I don't get it how it works together in groups.
Did you get it?
Well, she's saying that she can fairly well accept that everything that one is doing or thinking is according to the will of God.
Yes.
But her difficulty is that...
To know the will of God?
Pardon? No.
Is a difficulty to know the will of God?
No. The difficulty she has is when there is a group of people with her husband, that each one of them may have another intention, other thoughts, also given by God.
That is correct.
She has difficulties to accept this, that there are different wills of God, seemingly.
No, they are not different wills of God. How the intellect in individual body-mind organism works is the will of God. So the will of God is that different people think in different terms. The will of God is that different body-mind organisms think in different ways. And the different ways are according to the programming.
And if I live together with someone who has different goals, then does that mean, it reflects me? And does that mean I have to learn to adjust my way of thinking to the other part, or he has to adjust to me, or splitting, or...
No, you see, your question is, does it mean that I have to? What is the basis of your question? Does it mean that I have to? The answer is, whatever you do will be according to the destiny of this body-mind organism and the will of God. Does it mean that I have to? Means there is one successful method which you have to follow. There isn't. The basis of your question, does it mean that I have to do something to be successful? That is the way to complete the sentence. Does it mean that I have to do something to be successful? Not in your control. So, if you want to know the will of God, wait and see what you do. If you want to know the will of God, it's very simple. Just wait and see what you do. That is the will of God.
Maybe I use an example. If my friend hurts me,
yes,
then obviously it's my destiny to be hurt.
And yes, and he has no power to hurt anybody. No one has any power to hurt anybody. If the hurt is to happen, the hurt will happen. And the instrument through which that hurt happened was the destiny of that instrument to be the instrument to hurt you. A murder happens. What has happened? A killing has happened. What does it mean? It means the destiny of one body-mind organism to be killed and the destiny of other body-mind organism to be the instrument to kill that particular body-mind organism. A killing involves the destinies of two people according to the will of God. One is the killer, the other is the killed.
So my environment, the group of people around me, is being chosen through me to fulfill my destiny. Is that correct?
She says, she's asking whether the group of people that now is around her, whether that group was chosen by her to fulfill her destiny.
No, the group around you was chosen by God. And the destiny of this body-mind organism to have that particular group. It was God's will and the destiny of each of those people in the group to have one another as a group. It was the will of God and the destiny of every one of that group to be part of that group. That's how the group was formed. Because it had to be that group, that kind of a group.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello. Somehow this interest came up when you speak about the destiny.
I'm afraid you'll have to talk a little louder.
No problem.
Because
somehow
82 years of age, and my hearing was never very good, and now it's worse still.
Okay. So now somehow this interest came up that you spoke about destiny.
Yes.
And somehow this interest came up whether destiny is from moment to moment.
Yes.
Or is the whole story already written?
That's an interesting question, a good question. You see, we talk of destiny from the point of view of the individual. As far as the individual is concerned, something happens from moment to moment. But who has fixed the destiny? God has fixed the destiny. And God has fixed the destiny. God, who has fixed the destiny of each body, mind, organism for a limited span of life, has fixed the destiny of all the body, mind, organisms according to their respective spans of life for eternity. So, God has already made the movie. The movie is already there. God has written the script. God has produced and directed the movie. God is playing every character in the movie, and God is witnessing the movie. So, the destiny of each character has already been is already in the script, and the movie is already there. You see, as Niels Bohr told Einstein, we think God is playing dice with the universe. That is, we don't know what is going to happen next. Therefore, we think God is playing dice with the universe. We don't know what is happening next. But he said God is not playing dice with the universe. We think God is playing dice with the universe because we do not have the full information which God has. God has created the movie. He knows the whole movie. We know only scene by scene. You see? Whereas we can see only scene by scene, God has done the whole movie. He knows what the whole movie is about. We don't.
And there is a knowing about this, that it is like this?
And the acceptance of this.
There is...
this is a concept.
This is a concept.
It is a concept. So, that concept may be accepted, it may not be accepted.
But the question was, there is a knowing in you that this is the right concept, or that this is what really is.
So, whether you accept it as a right concept or you cannot accept it is God's will and the destiny of this body, mind, organism. So, if it is the destiny of this body, mind, organism to accept this concept and feel happier, that be the destiny. If it makes you, or gives you some relief, why not accept the concept? You see, if it gives you some relief, why not?
So to stay in this picture, would it mean, is it possible for God to change the movie as he's going along?
The movie has been done.
So even God couldn't change?
That is correct. The movie is already done. But if what you think should be changed or could be changed, then in the movie, the change has already been made. What you think as the change, what you think is the change has already been made.
Thank you.
What you think is the change has already been made. Here.
So, Ramesh, is absolutely everything that happens, even these words I'm saying, are inevitable?
Yes. That is my concept. Nothing can be changed by you or me.
Right.
If what we see now is to be changed, and if it is changed, that will be changed because it is the will of God. And the change has, as I just said, already been made in the moment.
So, this is a concept too, right?
Everything is a concept,
Sure.
please.
But is the purpose of the teaching
Yes.
to destroy? Is it only to remove false concepts?
The
So
purpose
that-
of this teaching is what Ramana Maharshi said. That's why I said even what you're getting now is conditioning. The conditioning as a thorn to remove the earlier thorn embedded in your foot. Ramana Maharshi said a concept can only be used as a thorn to remove another thorn embedded in your foot. And once the embedded thorn has been removed, you throw both the thorns away. You don't hang on to the thorn which was used as an instrument. Then, once the misconception has been removed, throw both the thorns away. In other words, don't hang on to any concept. Use the concept at that moment and forget the concept. Don't hang on to the concept.
And the teaching is revealed, if you like.
The teaching is
Revealed.
revealed.
Yeah, it's not something you made up.
The teaching is revealed in the sense that what is coming out now,
Yeah.
that, believe me, I am not doing the
That's
talking.
what I mean, yeah.
Nor are you. You see, when I say
Wait, no, I don't see.
when I say I am not doing the talking, I also mean no, neither are you. So what is happening? What is happening is a conversation taking place between two body-mind organisms, a conversation which is supposed to happen at this moment, only because it is God's will. A conversation is happening between two body-mind organisms.
With no purpose other than that.
Purpose only God will know.
Okay.
Purpose only God will know. A created object cannot know the will or purpose of the creator subject. A created object, which we both are, basically, cannot know the will or purpose of the creator subject. If you paint a painting with a figure in it, the figure in your painting can never know why you did the painting at all or why you created the figure the way you have. The figure cannot know. Which is, a created object, a human object, cannot know the will of the creator subject or the purpose. Same thing.
So is seeking just trying to find the purpose?
No, it isn't.
No?
No, the seeking is happening. It is the seeker who wants to find the purpose. And I am saying there never has been a seeker. Ever since a baby is born and seeks its mother's breast intuitively, life has been nothing but seeking. And the seeking has always depended on the programming of the body-mind organism through which that kind of seeking is happening. The seeking may be for money, seeking may be for fame, seeking may be for power, or the seeking may be to find out one's own nature. Whatever the kind of seeking, seeking is happening. There is no individual seeker. Lord Buddha has put it on a broader basis, and he says deeds are done, but no individual doer thereof. Seeking is happening, but there never has been an individual seeker. And the seeker, by divine hypnosis, through the ego, is created, and the seeker becomes happy and unhappy. Happy if he gets what he thinks he is seeking, unhappy if he thinks he hasn't got what he is seeking. But what is happening is seeking is happening. There is no individual seeker. But there is an individual seeker made to think he is the individual seeker through God's hypnosis, divine hypnosis, which is the ego.
Thank you.
Dear Ramesh, the concept you're teaching is wonderful. Yeah, you can put everything in it, and you can declare all problems. I'm wondering. Sometimes it's good to have also another concept. If you could tell us a concept without using the word God's will, without using the word destiny.
You see, now, if you ask me to talk to you on the basis that you are not here, how can I do that? So if you want me to talk on the basis that everything does not depend on God's will, when it does, that is, I'm talking to you because you are here. But you tell me, talk to me as if I'm not here. How can it be done? How can it be done?
Also another question.
Please.
Mother Teresa
Yes.
and many Christians, they live in the conviction that they are just a tool in the hands of God.
Yes.
So all the ego is not existent with this conviction. They are just feeling themselves as a tool.
No. See, now,
do you think that this is also leading to this understanding intuitively?
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
If this conviction and this concept maybe is leading to the same understanding like the Advaita concept.
Yes, provided that understanding, that conviction is total. Provided that conviction is unconditional and total, which is the same as understanding, which is the same as self-realization. But whether it is merely something that is, like, thy will be done. No one believes that, but it uses the word thy will be done. But how many really believe it? You see? So, to say that I'm not the doer, God is doing through me. So, to what extent the conviction, the depth, it depends on the depth and intensity of that conviction.
Because
you see, so now, if Mother Teresa did all she did with the conviction that God is doing through it, and still, I'm not saying she did, I'm not, but if she expected to be canonized or something like that, then the conviction was not total. I'm not saying she expected to be canonized. She may not have expected to be canonized. And she did what she did with the total acceptance that God is functioning through her. It could be. And if that conviction was total, it was enlightenment. It was self-realization. Catholic or Protestant or Hindu or Muslim, that makes no difference. If this conviction that there is no individual doer, everything happens only because it is God's will, is total and unconditional, then it, according to my concept, that is enlightenment or self-realization.
Because I remember the teaching of Ramakrishna Paramahansa and also Ramana. They recommended to the householders and those people who are working in the world with people whose minds are very towards the external world, more to have the approach to be the servant of God. Because with every concept there is coming a misconcept. Yeah? And with the concept of Advaita is coming the misconception of, or that we are more in a passive mood.
Yes.
And it's not good. Yeah.
In other words, what he says is, let your programming work. If your programming is for doing social work, do social work. Don't try to be a bhakta or an advaiti. If your programming is to be a devotee and bhakta, then don't try to go in for social work. Be a bhakta. Sing bhajans. Sing God's name. But if you are programmed to be an Advaitin, then what will happen is that you will not go towards social work. You will be inclined to come here. Nothing happens unless it is the will of God. So Ramana Maharshi or Ramakrishna telling someone to do this simply means they have to talk. But the underlining in both cases is it will happen only if it is God's will. That is the underlining thing, bottom line. Right. You are going to sing bhajan now, yes? Okay. Some question there? Then I...
May I have just one question?
Okay, last question. Right.
Well, you say
Don't
the
forget,
whole picture...
there are two more talks.
You say the whole picture is already here.
That is my concept, yes.
Yeah. And but could it be that when we say God doesn't know the next step. The next step is unfolding. Or are you sure the whole picture is already there?
My concept is the whole picture is already there. Mm-hmm. And your picture is that you want God to make the changes according to your wishes. That is why you want the picture not to be full and ready.
It would make me very, it gives me more feeling of being sure when I know the picture's there.
So,
Funny.
That's why, as I said, if that acceptance of that concept gives you peace and relief, why not accept it? But that acceptance will depend on God's will and the destiny of this body, mind, organism. So if you are able to accept it, if it is your destiny to accept it along with the peace and relief it brings.